Um, Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Results Grassroots Conference call for September 22. I hope you've all been enjoying the cooler weather and have had a good opportunity to have a summer break. And for anybody who's here for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. My name's Aaron Oxley. I'm the Executive Director of Results UK, and I'm going to say up front, this is my last month at Results after 13 years and my last Grassroots monthly conference call as Executive Director. I find it very hard to believe, and hopefully I'll be able to hold it together for the whole call. But more on that later. I'm going to start off with our usual housekeeping messages. We are recording the call and we'll post the recording on our website for anyone who's missed it to watch later. So do feel free to turn off your video if you'd rather not be in the recording. When we do post it up, we'll include links to all the resources and the links that have been shared in the chat box on the call. And so you'll be able to get those there. And we've turned on automatic captions, which you can turn on or off for yourself using the Zoom menu bar. Bit of etiquette, please do keep yourself muted during the call. And if you've got any questions or comments, please go ahead and use the chat box. We've got people watching that and maybe we can answer that in real time. If there is anyone new on the call, now's your chance to say hello. Please feel free to introduce yourself either by unmuting and saying hello, or you can just drop a hello in the chat function. Of course, we'd love to hear where you're calling in from, but it's also completely okay not to introduce yourself if you'd prefer just to listen in on your first time. Is there anybody that wants to say hi tonight?
Well, hi. I'm new to the call. What a strange bunch of people.
Welcome, Peter. Good to see you. Anybody else want to say hello?
Hi, I'm also new to the call. I'm Josh. I'm sorry, actually, so not too far from London.
Hi, Josh. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, it's going to be so short.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Any more new folks? Oh, sorry, I don't even have the chat open. And if anybody's put anything in there, where's that gone? There's the chat button. No? Okay. Well, that's great. It's wonderful to hear. And if you have joined and haven't said hi, we're still incredibly thrilled to have you with us. Thanks for joining. As always, I'm going to start tonight's call off with a few updates on what's happening in the world that affects the work of Results to overcome global poverty. The first thing to mention is quite obviously the big obvious one. We have a new Prime Minister. Liz Truss has, as all of you know, been the Foreign Secretary up until now, and she's been responsible for the UK government's international development efforts. It has to be said that quite quickly she had developed a reputation for not really being all that concerned about poverty at all, but more about enhancing Britain's prestige around the world and building economic ties with other countries. The government's international development strategy that she signed off when it was released back in May set out very clearly that the government's priorities were not poverty alleviation, but were instead promoting British interests, economic development, trade, and investment. Now, obviously, the last few of those things, development, trade, and investment in particular, they're not all that bad. However, we would argue quite strongly that this is absolutely not what our overseas development assistance budget should be being spent on. We're going to put a link in the chat box just now if you want to read more about all of that. But now she's Prime Minister, she faces some pretty urgent challenges, both international and domestic, with the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis likely to dominate. And while people speculate about whether she'll make tax cuts or help people suffering financially, it's pretty clear that international development is going to be well down her list of priorities. In the chat box, we're going to link to a recent article written just before the leadership election result was announced that sets out what is likely to be her approach to international development and global poverty. And it makes for sobering, but not unsurprising reading. Less than an hour ago, we learned who's been appointed the UK's Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, who has previously been an FCDO minister. He's been given the job. He's not shown himself to be very supportive of poverty reduction either, so we probably have to expect more of the same for the immediate future. Although, of course, it is possible that, like some secretaries before him, having some actual contact with the brief may create spaces for improvements in his views. I know that many of you have been concerned about how uninterested in our issues the government has seemed to be in the last year or so, despite having the responsibility of making wise spending decisions on the use of the UK's £11 billion of international development assistance budget each year, which is usually what people refer to when they talk about international aid. Right now, we don't see any increased likelihood of the government returning our ODA spending to its legal level of 0.7% of gross national income, or GNI, from the 0.5% it was reduced to last year by the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak. If anything, there could be further downward pressures. With Truss and Cleverly as two key decision makers, we expect to need to work harder than ever to persuade them to prioritise poverty reduction and using the UK's international development programmes to help people around the world to access their rights to health, education and economic opportunities. One thing that the new Foreign Secretary is going to need to do on day one is master the brief about the Global Fund to fight HIV, tuberculosis and malaria. As most of you know, international donors need to support this vital institution to the tune of $18 billion at a conference happening later this month. That money will be spent over the next 3 years to help get the world back on track in the fight against those three killer diseases. The UK has been asked to invest £1.8 billion at that replenishment conference. It's happening in New York on the 19th to the 21st of this month. And we hope that all the advocacy that you've been doing will bear some kind of fruit. We have to be honest, though, that we aren't particularly hopeful of reaching the full £1.8 billion that we've asked for in the present climate, but it's vital that the pledge the UK makes is as substantial as possible. I know some of you have expressed concern about whether writing letters to MPs or ministers is having an impact right now, but I remain absolutely convinced that even though the responses you get back are sometimes very non-committal, it's more important than ever to show them that there's a section of the public that really cares about these issues and has strong, evidence-based, thoughtful recommendations for how Britain should be acting to help meet our obligations to the poorest people and communities. Without political pressure, there will be no incentive to act. This is something that Results knows from long experience and remains absolutely central to how we think about making change happen. So please don't get downhearted. Look at this as another challenge that we collectively have to rise to. This month, we're going to be hearing from our guest speaker about what we can do now to fight polio, a disease which, though almost eradicated from the planet, could become more prevalent again if we don't act now. But before we discuss that topic, I want to make an exciting announcement, which is to tell you the name of my successor as Chief Executive of Results UK. She gets a job description upgrade as well, from Executive Director to Chief Executive. She's Kitty Ari, and she's previously been at Save the Children International, where she was the Interim Global Campaigns, Advocacy and Communications Director, and prior to this was Director of Advocacy for Save the Children UK. Before taking up these roles with Save, Kitty's worked as a journalist, researcher and critic with experience that includes time in the editorial team at The Atlantic magazine in the US, which I think is just a great publication, as well as a stint as a public policy specialist for the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, working on poverty alleviation there. She brings decades of experience to the role, and in all of our interactions to date, she's been impressive, thoughtful, and kind. I'm genuinely thrilled to be handing over the leadership of Results to somebody who brings so much to the table and who already understands just how powerful and necessary advocacy is in the fight against global poverty. I'm sure you'll welcome her with open arms and open hearts, as Kitty will be keen to meet as many of you as possible after she starts officially in a couple of weeks' time. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my time at Results, is that no one can do this work alone. And as you've heard, she takes on this role at a time when Results is going to rise to meet some big challenges to international development, and she's going to need your help. One thing I will say as I look back at 13 years in this role is that at the very heart of this work are the people who do it. We talk a lot about the impact we have in the world, the billions of pounds we've helped direct into the highest impact development program. Be that the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, or Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, or Nutrition for Growth interventions, or the Global Partnership for Education, or the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, or even the UK's bilateral support in countries like Zambia, where I have seen firsthand how young people from communities living in poverty can, with a little support to fund their study, can go and become community health workers, return to their communities and proudly help improve the health of hundreds of families in their neighborhoods and towns and villages that might otherwise be many miles from care. I have absolutely no doubt that the work of Results, that your work has helped save literally millions of lives and helped make millions more better. These are all real people who you and I will never meet, who may never even know what we've done. But we can rest assured that we've made a meaningful difference and helped restore some basic human dignity to their lives and put right the poverty that has been thrust upon them through no fault of their own. When new staff join Results, I give a slideshow, a presentation, talks about our history, and I always finish that presentation with this quote from the anthropologist Margaret Mead. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Please never forget that you are those people and you are part of that change. I consider it the greatest blessing of my life to have been a small part of that, and I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've done, but more importantly, for everything that you will do." I'm going to end this bit with one of my favorite quotes, which I think I have to credit to Mr. Anonymous or Ms. Anonymous. "History is written by those who turn up." So thank you all for turning up. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Tanya to tell us about what's happening around the UK.
That's a tough act to follow. Thanks, Aaron. So jumping into the Grassroots update, there's been a lot across the network this time, so it's been very busy. So first, there's been an incredible recruitment drive in Cheshire with extremely motivating radio adverts being placed. Richard in London has been very proactive in finding volunteer fairs and local volunteer service events where you can go and set up stalls. And Marcelo has also been trying to recruit members in Somerset to potentially set up a new group there. So also on the 8th in South Africa House and the 12th of September in Parliament, the small handful of campaigners from the London and Brighton groups will be attending these events to celebrate and discuss all the hard work we have been doing on the Global Fund. And the Brighton group have a new, very well-researched blog called Isolated Heatwave or Glimpse of the Future. So it's well worth a read, and a link will be put in the chat box. And I quickly wanted to ask everyone on the call if any of you or your groups have had any discussions on anti-oppression based on our August action. If you wanted to quickly bring up anything now. No, I think we'll move on to the next reminder, which is about the trustee nominations. So that deadline is coming up on the 16th of September, so in 10 days' time, and an election for the role will now take place at the next Grassroots conference call on the 4th of October. So one to add to the diary. And lastly from me, our autumn training programme will begin on the 13th of September, and sessions will run until our in-person training event in Manchester on the 15th of October. So you can find out more information about each session and sign up following the link to the Google form, which will be put in the chat box now. So that's all from me. Back to you, Aaron.
Sorry, just finding the unmute button. Thanks, Tanya. Now we're straight into introducing our guest speaker tonight. It is a great honor to introduce Safia Ibrahim, who on her Twitter account describes herself as a, quote, vaccine activist, polio survivor, and global health advocate. So she's originally from Somalia. She's now living in Canada and is a special vaccine advocate for UNICEF Canada, advocating for programs and efforts aimed at ending polio and other infectious diseases, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Safia, a very warm welcome. Thank you for being with us this evening. I think it's early afternoon where you are, so thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Just to let everyone know, I have a cold, so you might not hear me very well. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you very much, Aaron. So just to let everybody know, I contracted polio, as Aaron said, in Somalia when I was a toddler. And polio is a lifelong illness that infects the brain, and it paralyzes individuals that it comes in contact with. Not everyone, but some, and some might even die. So it's a very serious illness, and currently, Pakistan and Afghanistan, and but recently it has great gained traction because there was a new case in New York. So with me, I'm a passionate advocate because of my life experience and what I go through every day because of this illness that I contracted as a child, because I did not receive the vaccine that I needed. And it affects my life on a daily basis. I wear a brace on my leg and I use crutches. And I didn't start walking until I was 6 years old. I used to crawl. I'm very fortunate because I do live in Canada, so I do have access to healthcare. But if I didn't, my life would have been completely different if I was still living in Somalia. And I know that there are children in developing countries who are going through exactly what I went through because their parents did not vaccinate them due to vaccine hesitancy, like I was, or mine were, or just because they came across the illness before they received a vaccine. So, and honestly, I do feel for those children. And at this point in 2022, I passionately believe that there should not be any more polio cases because we do have that vaccine to combat the illness. And with me, polio has affected my life in ways such as when it comes like the career path that I wanted to take growing up in Canada, I couldn't pursue. I wanted to be a teacher, a kindergarten teacher actually, but I couldn't because children have a lot of energy and they need someone to run after them and all that stuff. So it took some time for me to realize that's not a career path that might have been right for me. So I've become an employment counselor instead, which I enjoy dearly. And I actually help persons with disabilities find employment. So it's fulfilling. And I do have 3 children. I'm a mom of 3, and my 3 children are older now. My oldest is 14 and my youngest is 9. So they're very active. They're involved in all sports, kickboxing, skating, everything you name, they're part of it. And for me, sometimes I'm reminded of my illness every time that I see them do play or take part in an activity that I cannot join in. And I do want to join in, and I want to play with them and I want to be part of their experience, but I cannot because I'm not physically able to because I contracted polio. So it's difficult, but I try to keep an upbeat attitude, and I instead volunteer to take photos. So I'm the professional photo taker of my family, as I'm sure most moms are. So it's hard. Polio is very much part of my life. At the age of 35, I had a hip replacement surgery. Usually people do not go through that type of surgery until they're in their senior years. And that was very hard for me to actually, I had to give in to the illness. And that was very hard for me because I tried to fight it every single day. So polio affects individuals financially and families financially as well, because if children with parents, they have to spend so much money on helping their children go through the help the children the medical costs and everything else, especially in developing countries, and they don't have that. They don't have access to that type of funds. So it's very hard, and I know my parents went through that same process as well. So that is why I advocate so that no child would have to go through what I went through growing up. And also another thing is that girls, if I, because I was a girl and I grew up in Somalia, I was born in Somalia, I was not given the right to education, not only because I'm a girl, but also I was a girl with polio. So my illness held me back. I have 4 younger siblings and they started school before I did, which to me at that age, I felt like it was unfair. It wasn't okay. But that's because of that illness. So I'm just thinking about all the children that have to go through all of that process and who are living that life that I escaped from. And I think that it's very important for us to be loud and for us to strive to eradicate this disease once and for all, right?
Thanks, Safia. I mean, look, hearing people's personal stories and how their experiences have led them to where they are in their life is, and the passion that's given them for the work that they do is always truly inspiring. It's one of my favorite parts of the call. So just a huge thank you for sharing that as to kind of open the dialogue that we have with the people on the call tonight about how we can explore how we can do exactly that and to help stop any children in the future from having to experience polio. We're going to jump across to get some pre-prepared questions for you. But for those who we're going to then, after we've got those, we're going to do our normal thing and take some questions both from the chat box, and if people are away from the keyboard and would prefer to text those in, the number tonight is 0777 56 111 78. That's 0777 56 11178. Write that down. We'll put it in the chat box too. But we're going to go straight over to the first question for this evening, which I believe is coming from the pool group.
Hello, Safia. I think have been answering the question partly already. I'm sure you. The question is, what is the impact of polio on children and their families?
Okay, well, the impact of polio and on children and their families is that, as I said earlier, it affects them financially. If that family is has a tight budget, they'll 100% end up in extreme poverty just because that one child is ill. They're spending all of their resources on that one child, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way that it had an impact on my life is that it affected me emotionally. It affected my self-confidence, especially in the early years as well. So I'm pretty sure if I did not have polio today, my life would be much better than it is today. So it also, like, what other ways does it affect? Like, in every aspect of anyone's life, having a disability, having polio affects every aspect of anyone with polio, right? And if you look at it from the perspective of my own children, they don't have a mom who is able to go skating with them without any adaptation equipment, right? They don't have a mom that is able to race alongside them, right? So they have to learn that from the earlier on, from the time when they're young. I have to teach them, like, I'm sorry, I cannot go have a race with you, right? But maybe we could sit down and have a picnic, right? So it's affects families a great deal in every aspect of their day-to-day living. Does that answer your question, Helen?
I'll save her from hunting for the mute button. I think that's a great answer, particularly following on from your initial introduction. Let's jump over to the Norwich group for the second question.
Good evening there, Safia. My question is, we've heard about recent new cases of polio in countries around the world. Is progress towards polio eradication going backwards, or is it still possible?
We are absolutely not going backwards. It is completely and totally possible to eradicate polio. We're 99% there. So we should move forward. And it might sound harsh for me to say this, but honestly, these new cases are bringing attention to our cause. So I feel like it's a good thing. And I think that we actually have the ammunition now to write to our MPs, approach our MPs. And we have hey, polio is just a plane ride away. It's totally possible for us to see it in the UK. There was some sampling that was found there, right? So yeah, I don't think we're going backwards. I think we're moving forward. But if we do not take action and we completely ignore what's going on right now in these new cases, then obviously we will go backwards, which would be shame on our part.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think that's actually a great segue into our third question, which is going to come from the Cheshire Group.
Hello, Safia. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Our question is, what can we do to help keep progressing towards polio eradication?
You're already doing it. I think Results does a great job as volunteers. I think you all do amazing jobs bringing attention to what's going on in the world and poverty. So I think the most impactful thing for me is meeting with your member of parliament. I think that you should schedule an appointment, either a telephone call or a video, Zoom, or even face-to-face. Write to your members of parliament and don't get discouraged, because once I actually had a member of parliament give me a call at home while I was having dinner. So I had to drop everything and answer it because he didn't give me a prior notice, right? So then this was the time when we were advocating for vaccines, the COVID vaccines for developing nations. So I was able to speak to him then. But they hear us, they know what we want, and they see what's going on in the world. And they'll only take action when we bring forefront when we let them know what our concern is and what we care about. So speaking to your MPs, writing letters, writing op-eds, and letter to your editor letters, and also volunteering just like you're doing right now, and with the Rotary Club, UNICEF, Results Canada, everybody, whoever that you can. I belong to a whole bunch of organizations I volunteer for. So yeah, I think just being loud, right, is very important.
Thanks so much. We're going to open this up now for everybody to ask questions for Safia. Does anybody want to unmute and ask one to kick us off? I've had one come in via the chat, but we'll start maybe with giving people a chance to ask one verbally. If not, nobody wants to take the plunge. 1 second. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Right. I'm afraid the person didn't leave their name. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask it. And then Kathy will come to you second. So get ready. You can go fastest finger after we've had this question. Oh, the person is writing, so maybe they will reveal themselves by the time I finish speaking. So Safia, the question goes, hi there. How large of a problem is vaccine hesitancy in poorer countries? And what work is being done to combat it so parents allow children to get polio vaccines?
It's a problem, but I don't, it depends on the region. Like, for instance, currently everyone recognizes that because of COVID, vaccines are vital and they are effective and they do work. So they hear that all the time. And I believe, number one, education is the key, right? Going into the fields and speaking to parents and letting them know what the outcome could be if they do not vaccinate their children. And also, I think it's more of a problem in the Western countries than in developing countries, just because I think that we forgot what the impact of these illnesses could be because we've been so fortunate enough not to see them. So it's been out of sight, out of mind, right? But I think that it's an issue and it could be overcome with education and having just regular conversations with parents. I think 100% parents care about their children and they want to do what's best for them. And if they hear the truth, which is that vaccines are safe, and and showing them what could happen if they do not vaccinate their children, then I think they would do the right thing.
Thanks, Safia. I mean, my own personal story on this is that a good friend of mine had a child 4 weeks ago. And for 3 days straight, I was bombarded with questions about what vaccines that they should get, because they knew that I knew something about vaccines. I was a trusted expert in their eyes. And of course, my response was, you get every vaccine the NHS tells you to get. You get it on the schedule. They say that they get it. And, you know, they were coming to me and saying, there's a polio outbreak in London. Do we get the polio vaccine? I'm like, yes, you get it according to the schedule. You get it according to the availability. And that was, and it really brought home, these are very smart people, very engaged, like very well educated. And even they had all these questions. They needed the reassurance, they needed the hand holding to do what was right for their child. So this is something that I think is absolutely universal. Kathy, your hand has been up very patiently. We're going to go to you next. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed. And really, it's not entirely a question. It's more actually, Safia, to say how great it is that you are a polio advocate, because actually, I mean, I have met in Scotland where I live, I have met several polio advocates, but they're all old people now, because basically we haven't really had polio among the sort of general population for such a long time. It does lead, like Aaron was saying, to this sort of sense that it doesn't really exist anymore. And I mean, I hope that is going to be the case. I hope one of these days, very soon. But because the fact that we are successful, this last push to get to 0 cases is going to be the hardest bit, because people have really assumed that it's no longer something that they need to worry about. As you say, there has been some outbreak situation here, which, as you were also pointing out, has had a little bit of a bonus for people who are reluctant or vaccine deniers or whatever. But I really wonder, is there much of a network among the polio advocates that have lived experience, and can you sort of find people of all ages who can advocate as well as you're doing?
Thank you very much for that, Kathy. It's very kind of you to say that. Yes, I am part of a polio network, members who are all polio survivors. And I know 2 individuals who are a bit older than I am and who say approximately the same age, but no one younger. And I don't want to get to know someone who's younger than me who has polio, because I just feel bad that they even have to go through this, even though we have the vaccine. But I think it's very impactful for them to share that story. So if I see anyone, I will, and they're willing to speak, then it would be nice to have them join the fight, because this is a very important fight.
Thanks, Safia. I am just a little bit of, I'm just going to go to Mark's question in the chat. Mark, just a bit of context to Mark's question for those who are new to polio or who are new to results. Mark's referring to parliamentarians in the UK who are One Last Push polio champions. You can tell Mark's been campaigning with us for a while, because I think we first did One Last Push polio champions a few years back, and we've been doing One Last Push for quite a while to try and get us over the line again. I'm just wondering, Safia, do you have any comments on that that kind of thing for Mark? I mean, I think, you know, that's a kind of a framing and a parliamentary push that goes beyond just the UK, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, just that honestly, parliamentarians are listening to us. They are aware of what we care about and what we're advocating for. But it's, I always say that numbers have a greater impact than one individual person. So it's good to see like a group here that really cares about this cause. So like, I feel like, well, it's true. Parliamentarians do work for us. We hire them, right? We pay their salary. So they should listen to us, and we should go to them with our concerns. And that's why I'm encouraging you, if you have the chance, to quickly just write them an email or send them letters, or they even read the newspaper. Some of them have the newspaper delivered to their home. So you can write a letter to the editor or an op-ed and express your concerns about polio. So they are hearing us. We just have to make sure we are allowed, and that's the only way for them to take action.
Thanks so much. And for those who are wondering, was there parliamentarian a One Last Push polio champion? The website is still up. Let me just put that in the chat just here. There it is. Had a bunch of polio champions in there. These are people that I think you would be very much, you should be encouraged in seeing those parliamentarians there and be able to contact them. You know that they have been champions in the past, and for the most part remain champions still, the parliamentary pressures notwithstanding. So I think very much the case.
Sorry, Erin, but I think an idea just popped to my head. A great way for you to engage with those individuals is just by thanking them for being part of the campaign in previous years, and reminding them that this illness still exists and it's here, and you care about it and you want to do something about it. So if they were advocates and they cared about it before, then I'm 100% sure they're willing to take action against it now too.
Yeah, and Naveed has noted in the chat that the website hasn't been updated in a wee while, so they've lost, I think, potentially a small amount of momentum most recently, but still, it's a fairly impressive list of champions, and people once activated are usually more than happy to take another action in the future, particularly when we can give them something quite concrete to do, as we're doing this evening. I'm going to go, unless anybody wants to put up their hand, I'm actually going to go back to another message that has come in, as a follow-up to the very first question, which was going back to the vaccine hesitancy question. And the question says, is access to polio vaccines a greater problem than hesitancy in developing countries?
That's a great question, but I'm not an expert in that field, but I would probably say that access to polio vaccine is probably more of an issue than hesitancy, just because there are individuals who live in remote places and that cannot be reached. I know that people who actually are in the fields sometimes ride camels. They go through all these trials. I'm sure you've all seen the videos of them getting to the last mile video, right? So I think they're probably just reaching that remote areas, I think, is more of an issue than hesitancy and having access.
Yeah. I think that's, I would absolutely agree with it, Safia. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the challenge with polio vaccination is that you really have to get every single child. And I think this is something that in a lot of contexts, a lot of the lessons from polio were applied to COVID in terms of surveillance, in terms of outreach, in terms of a whole pile of public health interventions. And so I think that is another one of the things about many of the polio programs around the world, is that precisely because they have to reach every child, and precisely because that can be so difficult, so much is invested in trying to do that and reaching every child, you can actually generate some relatively exciting, positive, additional outcomes off the back of that programming, which is one of the reasons that Results UK has always been, well, for many years now, has been excited about the possibility of polio eradication, because it's more than just polio; it's multi-dimensional. Does anybody? I've got a question here from the Cheshire group. Would anybody from the Cheshire group like to read it out, or shall I read it for you? Oh, I see Sandra reaching for the screen.
There you go. Turn it around. Yeah.
Okay, anyone ready?
Oh yeah.
Well, go ahead, Cheshire.
Our heads were a bit scrambled with different ideas, but I guess sort of a nervousness really. So with on the subject of polio, we're saying that it's been recently eradicated from Nigeria, and therefore there are only 2 countries in the world left that have polio, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And so our one last push is focused on that. But it did turn up in the sewage in London. A case went to somebody traveled with polio to New York, if I understand correctly. Karen tells me that new cases in Malawi, which may be people coming from Pakistan. So are we in danger of kind of having a new country polio infected before we manage to eradicate it from Pakistan and Afghanistan? Sort of a related question is, what actually constitutes an outbreak?
That's a technical question. It's a good one. Aaron, do you have any idea?
It's our absolute technical expert, Xavi, is actually at this very moment stepping onto an airplane. So otherwise, I'm sure she would very much give us the very, very technical answer of what constitutes an outbreak. I think one of the big things about some of the more recent polio spread around the place is that there's a difference between the wild polio vaccine, which has been circulating wild, and vaccine-derived polio, which is where people that have been vaccinated can develop polio from, in extremely rare cases, can develop polio from the vaccine, because the virus itself is weakened, not completely dead. How one of the polio vaccines works, and where you have only vaccine-derived polio, that's much easier to get under control. It's usually much smaller, and so on, and it can be much more easily contained. Whereas the wild polio is where we're talking about eradicating from a particular country in a particular context. Yeah. Oh, in fact, so Chavi has just sent me a message that she's walked to the back of the queue to get on the airplane, and would like to say a couple of words. So Chavi, please correct anything that I've said that's inaccurate.
Thanks, Aaron. Let me know if there's disturbance. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. Okay, great. Just want to take the question about the outbreak and how concerned we should be, especially in the context of other countries, before eradication. So one thing, I think everything you said, Aaron, is absolutely spot on. One thing I also just want to add is that we should also just be very clear about the fact that there's a big difference between things being in the sewage and finding variants in the sewage, and cases and people being infected. So in terms of an outbreak, you may hear things being considered an outbreak, but there's again a difference between, you can consider something polio virus can be considered circulating, and that means there's been people can be infected and they can essentially be carrying the infection. So if people are vaccinated, they can still carry it and transmit it. But that doesn't mean that there's an outbreak. People don't have cases or infections, and that's due to access to vaccines. The very, very fortunate access to vaccines that we have. So the risk of actual outbreaks is still minimal at the moment if we continue with our vaccination rates, and which is why I don't know if some of you may be aware that there are a vaccination campaign in London at the moment for boosters. So that's essentially part of making sure that we are staying at the stage where there is, we are detecting these outbreaks, detecting the sewage samples. It may be circulating, but there's no outbreak. So that's the answer about that. And if I've missed something, I'm happy to answer for a couple more minutes.
Thanks, Chavi. And I think that's an important distinction because, you know, what we don't want to do is allow panic or alarm to drive policy. And we definitely also don't want to start any kind of stigmatization of particular groups or people or bring any of that about either. So it's important to be quite measured in our response. And I think, you know, this is exactly why we've got the Catch Up campaign in London, and exactly why you'll see all of the public health communication in the UK be extremely careful about the language that's chosen to talk about the detection of polio in London sewage, and with what's happening with real people and in their lives, because we don't want to you know, negatively stigmatize or overly alarm people, but at the same time, it is an important situation that demands attention. It's something that we need to deal with. Safia, I don't know if you want to comment any further on that.
No, the only thing I want to say is that one polio case in the whole world is one too many. So we should do everything that we can just to get rid of this illness.
Yes, absolutely. And when it's done, it's done. That's the other wonderful thing about this. We actually have the prospect of completely eradicating this disease from the face of the planet. And that is, quite frankly, very inspiring. We've been so close for so long, and it is absolutely within our grasp. Do we have, I noticed that we have, let's see, good. I don't have any more messages coming in on the telephone. Are there any more messages in the chat that I have missed?
Mark
Deirdre
just added that an outbreak is when there are 2 or more infections. Thanks, Mark.
Deirdre's question, I think we'll go back to hers. And Safia, this may not be your explicit area of expertise, but I'll ask it anyway just to see. Deirdre's asking, how far is the political situation in Afghanistan, which of course is always quite tricky to comment on, but how far is the political situation in Afghanistan still affecting vaccine delivery there?
I heard that the Taliban is currently allowing individuals to go into communities and vaccinate children. So I think that's a positive step in the right direction. But obviously it could be better. There's nothing better than full access. If healthcare workers could just go in and educate parents and vaccinate the children, because everyone needs to be vaccinated at the same time in order for the vaccine to be impactful. So it's better than before, but there's still a long way to go.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very helpful, it's a very helpful answer. And I think it's important for us to recognize the bravery and determination of the vaccinators that are working in those environments, that is a sheer determination to make sure that every child is getting vaccinated is absolutely, I mean, I don't want to use the word heroic in the sense of making it, you know, romanticizing it, but these are people who, because this is hard work and tough decisions that people are making to do this work, a little bit like, you know, when you turn the NHS into a heroic service, you know, it sort of in some ways takes away from the actual hard graft of the work. So I think we should definitely acknowledge that, while also recognizing the important, really important and inspiring elements of it. Alexander, do you want to ask your question out loud?
sorry, how easily does does polio spread? Is it spread as easily as common cold?
Yes, it's airborne, and it could also be spread through like stool and coming in contact with the person who's infected. So it's you still have to go through the whole protocol of washing your hands to avoid it, and taking care of yourself and making sure that you don't come in direct contact with the person who's infected. I actually caught it from my sister, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, contagious for sure, infectious.
So is it spread as easily as COVID? Could there be like a pandemic because polio starts to spread again?
I'm not sure. I don't think we'll reach that level of COVID. I don't think polio will reach that level, just because we know how to combat it, and we know how to deal with it, right?
Okay, yeah.
I don't think that we have the vaccine too. We don't have to spend some time developing a whole new vaccine. So I don't think it will get to that, because we've been through that already. But it's something that we should be aware of, and we should strive to getting rid of it in the whole world, because just having one case still out there still has that possibility of someone else contracting it.
One thing I will also say is that,
thank you.
Sorry, Alexander. One thing I will say is that I have seen a study that looked at what would happen if we stopped vaccinating against polio full stop and just let it run, and the spread of the disease. So some researchers did some modeling about that. I'll see if I can dig that modeling out and share that as part of the links for the call. The numbers are definitely not at COVID levels, but they are much, much, much higher than anyone would want, and they're numbers that would be, quite concerning. So yeah, I'll see if I can find that modeling for you, Alexander, and if I can, we'll include it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll include it in the links when we put the call up. We have only 7 minutes left, but we've got a question from Jill in the chat. Jill, do you want to ask that question out loud?
Yeah. Could you or somebody say a little bit about the benefits of having a good polio eradication program? Because I know that it's affected other health programs in countries that have had a robust system. It might be something which would be helpful when we're writing to MPs,
Well, the most important thing that I could think of, or the most important benefit, is a child not having to use walking aids, or not missing out on education and activities, and just being a child, and not spending time in hospitals. The whole like in Canada right now, no one ever thinks about polio, right? And that's a privilege. And I think that's a privilege that everyone should have the right to. No one should be thinking about their child catching polio, right? So that's a major benefit, is just knowing the fact that you don't have to worry about this illness anymore, and knowing that your child will not have a disability.
Chavi would like to jump in. So Chavi, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. And thanks, Safia. That's a really great answer. I just wanted to add for Jill as well that so GPI, I think some of the key things that they do is over the years, they've got over 30 years of expertise in building trust in communities. And this has been instrumental in especially the COVID response. So they were huge in going door to door, reaching communities. So there was a 4-month pause on polio campaigns, and they mobilized, they reached door to door to communities to reach on COVID services. Okay, there's an announcement. I'm going to put the rest in the chat.
Thanks so much, Chavi. Real dedication. She just WhatsApped me and said, my flight's delayed. I can answer this question. So she's literally sat in her seat on the airplane, which I don't know how she's got reception there. It's amazing. But thank you, Chavi, for weighing in. One thing I will also say is that, before COVID, we had Ebola. There were quite a lot of Ebola scares across the continent of Africa, and indeed in the UK and in other countries. And one of the things, I'm putting a link in the chat just now, one of the things that the big lessons that came out of that was that we should be looking to countries like Nigeria to understand, and their polio program, to understand how to identify and control infectious disease outbreaks, using Ebola as an example, and building off the back of the investments in infrastructure, training, and leadership that existed in the polio programs. There's 7 lessons from polio for the Ebola response in Nigeria that I put in the chat there. Really great article, very much worth a read. So much to learn from here. So much to learn from here. I'm very conscious that we only have. And Chavi put in the chat. They reached communities door to door to ensure they had robust track and tracing systems, using their expertise to communicate the importance of hand washing and hygiene due to some of the same lessons from polio, reaching people with vaccines, just amongst a few examples. That was to finish off Chavi's example that she started. I'm really sorry, but we only have 3 minutes left, so we're going to have to begin wrapping up the call. I want to start doing that by saying an absolutely massive thank you to Safia for joining the call tonight, for sharing your personal story, for sharing your passion, for sharing, above all, your expertise. And just really grateful that we can hear all this from you directly, and to understand what it means personally, what it's meant in your life, but also what it means in the world to beat this disease. So thank you so very much. I am going to have to wrap up a few things now. I'm going to finish off with a round of thank yous. A big thank you to all of the grassroots at Results. I think I thanked you at the beginning of the call, but I'm going to thank you again now. It really has been a privilege to work alongside all of you in the last 13 years as executive director. I want to thank the staff at Results. They are a bunch of absolute rock stars. They are just some of the best people in the sector, some of the smartest, most thoughtful, most dedicated people in the sector, who have moved heaven and earth time and time again to make sure that all of you have your briefings, have the support you need to take action, but also they're no slouches in doing direct advocacy towards the UK government, decision makers, civil servants, other people in the sector, of doing outreach to people like Safia, and making sure that we can hear from her directly. Super important. I did a quick search through my my contact list, and a rough count, I think I've worked with 100 staff, 100 different amazing people in my time at Results, and that is just the alumni network is the best batch of people you're ever going to find. They've just been totally lovely. An extra special thank you to Naveed. Naveed, you don't know this, but Naveed ghost writes chunks of my script every month. Not all of it, but he makes me look smart. He makes me look articulate. He makes this job so much easier. I definitely don't want to finish my last Grassroots conference call without calling out all of the work that Naveed has done behind the scenes over many years to make this whole process and this evening go so very well, alongside with the rest of the crew and the Grassroots team and other folks that are on the call. So big acknowledgements to everybody there. I'm not sure I noticed any board members on. If you are, I apologize for not calling you out, but the board's been great. Was in my last ever board meeting with them last night and got to thank them all directly, but I want to thank them all here publicly as well. The Results UK board is without a doubt the best board we've ever had. It's a bunch of really, really engaged, very super smart, dedicated people. And we're lucky to have them staying on board as well. So I really hope that you're all feeling really inspired to take this month's action on this disease that Results has been working on for so many years. The end of that disease is very much in sight, but it's not something that we can take for granted. Now is an absolutely critical time to take action, especially at a time when issues in global health aren't at the top of the government's agenda. I really think it's so important to raise the issue yet again with them. And we've got an opening and an opportunity to do so with a very concrete thing to ask for. I wish you the best of luck with this action, with many others. And as you know, Results is all about helping people use their own personal and political power for change, helping us all to work to reach a world without poverty and injustice. You're doing that every month. I'm really proud to have been a part of that journey. If anybody would like to stay in touch with me, I'm on Twitter, but not that much. I'm not a huge socials person, but I'm on Twitter at @Oxley. More importantly, my personal email address, handing that out, use it for good, is aaron@aaronoxley.com. It's pretty easy. Remember my name and you know how to spell it, aaron@aaronoxley.com. I'd love to hear from you on my personal account. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look me up. You can connect to me there. If you do get a hold of me, I'm going to have an extremely busy September as I finish everything up, and probably an extremely busy October while I recover from finish everything up. But I would love to hear from you, and I would love to be in touch. And I would say, you know, if you have been on the calls, if you've been on more than one conference call and you haven't worked out what my mobile number is, you haven't been paying attention. But I'm not going to say it out loud again now. Thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as I said earlier, it's been the honor of my life. So thank you so much. The next Grassroots conference call, and I am reading all the thank yous in the chat. I just can't possibly reply to them all. I'm going to save it before I hang up the call so I can look at it a little later this evening and feel very emotional. The work is not done. The next Grassroots conference call is going to be happening next month. It, as always, is going to be on Tuesday, the 4th of October. After 13 years, it's going to feel very weird to have my Tuesday night free. It's going to be at the usual time of 8 p.m. But for the last time from me, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Big hugs, have fun, stay strong. Love you all.